Dear all, welcome. My name is Aspasia Pastra from the World Maritime University in Sweden. Today, with my distinguished speakers, we will talk about oceans and ocean observation technologies. Let me first set the scene of the discussion. The ocean covers 71% of the planet's surface. It generates 50% of the oxygen we breathe. It captures 25% of all the carbon emissions we produce. And it absorbs 90% of the excess overheat that these emissions produce. So it's not just the lungs of the Earth. It's the beating heart, it's the biggest buffer. Despite all this, 80% of our oceans remain unexplored due to their extreme conditions and pressures that exist down in the ocean floor. We know more about the surface of the Moon and the Mars than we know about the ocean floor. It's easier to send a drone in the surface of the Moon than to send a drone or remote-operated vehicle on the ocean floor. Children learn in schools about tigers and elephants, but they don't know about marine mammals. They don't know about Prochlorococcus, a tiny bacteria that produces 20% of the oxygen in the biosphere. And that's a higher percentage than all the tropical rainforests combined. Our oceans are under threat. We have the triplanetary crisis. And the triplanetary crisis is about all these environmental emergencies that are interconnected. So, first of all, it's about the biodiversity loss. All these marine mammals that are in the extinct of disappearance and extinction. Secondly, we have the pollution, plastic pollution, toxic pollution. And thirdly, we have climate change, which is driven by human-centric activities and greenhouse emissions. And this causes our oceans to get overheated. The good news is that we are not helpless. Advances in robotics, sonars, underwater vehicles, especially over the last 10 years, can combat the triplanetary crisis. So, for example, with all these technologies, glitter, robot submarines, we can identify new species and combat the biodiversity loss. With these technologies, we can monitor the pollution, plastic pollution or oil spills. And of course, these technologies enable us to measure ocean and parameters, physical, chemical, geochemical, that allow us to monitor better the climate changing that happens. So the advantages are there. But now I want to talk with my distinguished panel as a first question about the challenges we have with these ocean observation technologies. And I will start the discussion taking the environmental aspect, and I will ask the CEO of POGO, which is the Partnership for Observation of the Global Ocean, Sophie Seeyave. So Sophie, welcome, and we are ready to hear about the challenges we encounter.
Okay. Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. So the challenges, I feel like we could sit here for over an hour talking just about the challenges. But as you've mentioned, the triple planetary crisis is about climate, pollution, and biodiversity. And climate observation and monitoring and prediction was really the main driver behind the initiation of the Global Ocean Observing System in the early 90s. And this led to the development of some of the technologies that you see on the screen here, Argo floats, for example, which are now really the backbone of the climate observing system. And the scientific community has been very successful in establishing these systems for climate monitoring and prediction. However, when it comes to pollution and especially biodiversity, it's much more complicated to observe those things using unmanned technologies. There's a lot of development going on, but we're not quite ready yet to be able to just add sensors to unmanned vehicles to monitor pollution. Pollution is one word, but it encompasses many different types of pollutants. There are many different types of different compounds that are classed as pollutants. There's plastics, of course. And then there's also the ones that we maybe don't necessarily think of so much, like noise and light pollution, which affects marine life. So that's a very complicated area, and then even more so, I would say, for biodiversity, because this relies on us being able to identify species, doing that in an automated way with unmanned vehicles is very challenging. And then also, it's not just about biodiversity, it's also about ecosystem health and understanding the impacts of these multiple stressors, such as pollution, ocean warming, ocean acidification, the lack of oxygen in the ocean. So understanding all of those impacts on not only biodiversity, but ecosystem health, food web dynamics, and things like that. So just kind of observing those three interlinked kind of components of the planetary crisis is a challenge in itself. But then we also have the kind of translation of those observations into policy, and how we, how can scientists make that data understandable to policymakers and actionable. So, for example, artificial intelligence is one way that can not only give us the data in the first place, for example, through analyzing imagery and identifying species from those images, but also making it possible for everyday people and policymakers to be able to kind of talk to the data. So ideally, we would have systems where people can just ask their favorite AI bot, what species are living in my local waters, what are the chances of me getting E. coli if I bathe off such and such a beach, how safe is it to eat shellfish in this area, and things like that. So really being able to translate the data into policy and action. I could go on, but I want to leave time for the other panelists as well.
Excellent. So I had the environmental aspect. Now I will proceed to the legal aspects and the legal challenges we encounter with these technologies. And with me, I have Maria Gavouneli, the Director General of the Hellenic Foundation for European and Foreign Policy, ELIAMEP. Maria, give us your view on the legal challenges we encounter.
Where should I start? Good morning, everyone. It's always a pleasure to be back in Delphi. What we have done over the years in the seas is actually coming up with some basic rules and have all these basic rules reflected in the Law of the Sea Convention. The basic rules say that the closer you are to the land, the easier and stronger it is for the coastal state to supervise and, in essence, give permission for several types of work. So the whole marine environment is actually layered up in maritime zones. These maritime zones would not necessarily coincide with marine ecosystems. So there's your first challenge immediately. You might have the same ecosystem split between the territorial sea and NEEZ, or even the high seas. And there are different regimes applicable, different rules applicable in each one of those situations. Second, the way we have organized our work in these maritime zones and in layers, in other words, allocating jurisdiction to the coastal state mostly. We have decided that certain uses of the seas are going to be regulated in a specific way. So we do have elaborate provisions about fishing, for instance, in the EEZ, the exclusive economic zone. We have a general understanding of what research, scientific research might be. And we have decided that we would like to regulate fishing, but we would like to see marine research as a freedom of the seas, that is going to be carried out without any particular permission, unless it is applied research. So let's go back to all of those technologies that you see on your screens. Some of those are actually pure research for biotechnology, for pollution, for things like that. But you can easily see the possibility of using these structures for other purposes as well. Defense comes to mind. All kinds of military uses. So the same thing that is extremely valuable in maritime research could be equally valuable in intelligence operations. What it would be the case? Would we operate on the freedom of the seas in terms of scientific research, or are we going to keep a very close eye on the possibility of these type of dual-use operations, or even strictly military operations? Then we have technology interfering. Our understanding so far, and therefore our rules, have been constructed around the idea of attribution and responsibility. So there was a human somewhere, the captain. The captain would take orders from the flag state or the coastal state if it's closer to the harbor. And whatever the captain is doing would actually be reflected further on to the relevant state. We're talking about unmanned vehicles here, which means that the captain is not actually in the maritime zone that we're talking about. The captain might well be thousands of kilometers away in a basement, sort of playing around electronics in front of a screen.
So it becomes operator.
Absolutely. So questions of attribution and therefore questions of responsibility change slightly or greatly, but they do change. And that is really an area that we need to delve more and we need to know more. Our legal regime is stable enough, but our legal regime needs to be realigned in view of these new technologies and these new challenges. And this is what is happening as we speak. I think I should stop here and move on with the rest.
I know that, yeah, the legal challenges are never ending. And I will come to Marianna Nathanail, the head of European Investment Bank office in Greece, that will give us a totally different perspective from the challenges, I suppose, from your own prism, from the European Investment Bank.
Thank you very much. And I think that, first of all, I need to explain some things about the bank and to show the relevance with this discussion. The European Investment Bank, what you already know is that it is the Bank of the European Union. It is maybe the largest financing institution of the world with 600 billion balance sheet. It is owned by the member states, by the 27 member states, which means that we are acting for the benefit of the member states. And at the same time, we're implementing the policies and the strategic priorities of the European Commission, the European Union. What you may not know about the bank is that we have reinforcing our role as the climate bank of the European Union, which means that already in 2021, with a climate bank roadmap, we have undertaken to invest $1 trillion in green investments by 2030. And we are, I think that we will be on time to deliver what we have promised. Half of our investments per year are focused on green investments, sustainable investments. And we are the first institution that has aligned all our operations. We have aligned all our operations with the Paris Agreement. So in 2024, we updated our priorities. Our governing bodies endorsed the new priorities of the EIB, among which is to reinforce our role as climate bank of the European Union, promote digital governance. So I'm trying to pick the ones that would be most relevant to the theme of our question. And of course, defense, security and defense. based on these priorities, these are areas that we will continue focusing. What we have done the previous years is that we have started mapping the blue economy sector. We have a very successful initiative with the European Commission, the Blue Champions Initiative, where we tried to map scale-up companies in the blue economy sector. We had more than 70 applications, groundbreaking technologies. We have already selected 12, and we are providing technical assistance for them to promote and progress their projects and their financial business cases. We also have unmanned vessels technologies identified. And this was the opportunity to understand what are the challenges that they're facing. So the challenges that we have identified is the lack of testing facilities. This is very important. They may exist, but some need to be developed further or expanded. And related also to this, to the lack of testing facilities, we have identified the fact that it's fragmented, the regulation maybe. So we have lack of, the permitting procedures are very complicated. They are not, the regimes are not aligned. So we see, and of course they face huge financing needs. But I would focus on the testing facilities and the need for alignment of regulation to allow them to explore and get out of the, now they are in labs, now they are in research centers. They need to expand, they need to get out of the labs.
Labs, yes. Great, thank you. I will start again from you now, since you brought the financial aspect. And I will mention that these technological informations, no matter if they are robot submarines or unmanned vessels, they require significant investment. So where should all this funding come from? And how we can incentivize both the public and private sector to invest in this blue technology revolution? And I will start from you, Marianna.
Definitely what we have, through this pilot regime and the report that we have prepared, we have identified that there are huge funding needs because there is, all these technologies are not so mature to attract investors. Investors need trust, so they are full of ideas, but they're very poor in capital. Indeed, we need to promote private sector investments. But this cannot happen in one day, of course. So we need to, first of all, build the ecosystem. I think that this is the first thing that we need to focus. And we need to create an environment with, first of all, it should be the public sector supporting. We need blended instruments in order to de-risk these investments, because these investments are really risky. And we need to give trust to the investors. So the bank, of course, somebody would ask, for example, if the EIB is supporting these technologies. And what I can mention is that we have many different tools to support this kind of investments. First of all, we have equity-like instruments, like venture debt, which we can support these technologies. We can provide technical assistance through the Innovation Fund, for example. We have dedicated tools for small and medium enterprises that are active in the blue economy sector. We have the European Investment Fund, our subsidiary, focusing on innovative companies and SMEs. But at the same time, we can also support academia. We can support infrastructure, universities, research centers. We have excellent examples in Greece. We have supported, for example, Democritus Research Center, and they developed an amazing technological park hosting innovative companies, and we have excellent examples coming from there. So I think that banks, multilateral development banks, the European Union can support this, all these technologies, all these companies, and this can build trust to the investors. And this can attract, it can spark investments.
Thank you so much. And Sophie, from your perspective as a marine scientist, how we can incentivize both the public and private sector to invest in these technologies? Financial is one aspect, but there are more aspects.
Yes, so I would say that the main thing really is to demonstrate the benefits to society of these technologies and the data that they can provide. And again, going back to the example of climate and weather forecasting, everyone understands the importance, particularly of weather forecasting, not just for everyday people to be able to know if it's going to be sunny or raining today, but also particularly the economic benefits of weather forecasting, and also for the benefits for human safety to be able to predict hurricanes and so on. And I don't think everyone knows necessarily that a lot of the data that are needed for weather forecasting come from the ocean, measurements of ocean temperature, for example. But the benefits are clear, and I think we need to make those benefits clearer for biodiversity or biological ocean observations as well, and really put the message out that these technologies, which can be used and with further development could be used to really be able to predict things like harmful algal blooms, which have severe impacts on the aquaculture industry, for example, but also for human health implications, things like waterborne diseases. I mentioned earlier pathogens like E. coli, managing fisheries and aquaculture, and then obviously all the impacts on tourism from pollution or from having contaminated water. So I think if we put more effort into kind of ocean literacy and communicating the benefits to society and to the global economy of the information that can be derived from these technologies and the need to invest in developing systems that can be added to unmanned vehicles, for example, to one promising technique for looking at biodiversity and pathogens and other things like that is called environmental DNA. It's basically looking at, from a sample of water, you can take DNA, which will give you an idea of what species have been in the water, a bit like if looking at a crime scene, the criminal will have left behind fingerprints and DNA. You can do the same with samples from the ocean or from fresh water and analyze the DNA to see which species have been recently through that bit of water. So there's a lot of work happening to adapt DNA sequencing and sampling to these unmanned technologies so that we can really roll out this type of measurement globally and in a sustained, continuous way with data. One day, data will be transmitted back to shore directly from these instruments, telling you exactly which species are in which bit of the ocean.
I keep ocean literacy as a very important aspect for these technologies. And for you, Maria, what we can do?
Well, law is actually a reactive science, so, and an art. So we are always falling behind developments simply because we need to understand what is happening so that we do come over and regulate them. So even if we act immediately, there's always going to be the tiniest of time gaps, which really means that we either have to run after developments, which we do. We do see technology moving ahead very, very quickly in ways that we do not necessarily understand. I mean, the easiest example is artificial intelligence. Lawyers are totally and completely baffled by it. We use it, but we don't understand it. And of course, to the extent that you do not understand it, you cannot regulate it properly. We need to start thinking out of the box. And the way to start thinking out of the box is actually moving away from specific rules and procedures that come up with detailed procedures and suggestions as to what we are going to do with specific conduct for each particular case, towards a more generic kind of regulation that talks about principles, that creates the framework, and that would allow people and technologies enough leeway to develop. And I think that is the way forward. We have tried that when we started talking about climate change. It was at that point that we understood that the states cannot really cope with that exclusively. And we made absolutely certain that society as a whole, corporations, the private sector, civil society would have to get involved into this kind of discussion. And that would involve not only regulation, but also financing. It would actually leverage all kinds of things. I think that we're moving towards this kind of operation. Once again, artificial intelligence would actually be our theater of operations immediately right now. I am entirely certain that there are going to be trouble points ahead. There are going to be situations where we simply fail to adequately regulate. But that's the way we move forward. We react, and we need to just start thinking outside the traditional ways of thought.
Yes, and I like the statement that we say the law follows technology.
Absolutely.
I will stay now a little bit in the legal regime because we have a major development in the international ocean policy arena. In June 2023, almost after 2 decades of negotiations, all the countries adopted the BBNJ agreement, which means the Agreement of Biodiversity Beyond National Jurisdiction. It's the Treaty of High Seas. So this treaty is about the ocean. It's the areas beyond the national jurisdiction. And in this area, in this agreement, there are provisions about how we will protect marine biodiversity in our oceans, how we will create high seas marine protected areas, how we will share the benefits that will come from the marine genetic resources. And there are also provisions about the transfer of technology. So, staying at this point, at the transfer of technology, in this BBNJ agreement, in the agreement of the high seas, what role technologies will play there?
The BBNJ is actually our new frontier, if you like.
Yes.
Simply because, as the title says, it refers to the high seas beyond national jurisdiction, which means beyond the areas where the state may decide on its own. It has always been a discussion that here we're talking about global commons, we're talking about something that belongs to all of us and at the same time to none among us. Therefore, there's always a question of who takes the lead and who pays at the end of the day. Because, of course, in order to invest in this kind of thing, you need to have some kind of return. And in this environment that we live these days, this kind of transactional approach becomes even clearer, if anybody had any doubt whatsoever. What we have seen in the BBNJ, which is yet to come into force, we hope it will happen fairly quickly, but we still need a fair number of states to sign up. We need 60 states in order for the convention to come into force. We need to start thinking about the operation of procedures. It is very, very interesting that the BBNJ agreement does not have rules as such. Yes. It has just created procedures. In other ways, mechanisms whereby states are going to cooperate with each other. Again, these procedures are not detailed, they simply outline the way ahead. and they leave just about everything under the sun to the states themselves to figure it out. So yes, there is a mechanism for technology transfer. However, what kind of technology are we going to share? Depending on the technology that we're going to share, we need to find means and ways to share that technology. Who is going to pay for that technology? Who is going to benefit from that technology? Who is exactly the state or the private corporation that might be wishing to share the benefits of that technology? So there are a number of issues that are there, and we need to address that. Sometimes it would be a decision that would have to be made on the spot, depending on the type of technology that we're talking about, and depending on the needs. In theory, you could say that, you know, this is a very expensive LLM, large language model in artificial intelligence, for instance, or something like that. This should be public. Well, no, really? Should. People might be wishing to keep it for themselves in a sort of a closed code kind of situation. And then you end up with a disaster in your hands, a crisis, and suddenly this closed code becomes open access code. So it might actually work either way. We cannot predict. The only thing we can do is create the general framework that would allow the system to develop from within.
Yes, exactly. And Sophie, I know that these technologies for our ocean, from a marine science perspective, probably are very crucial. For example, till now we have identified 250,000 marine species, but the scientists say that the number may be 10 times higher. So especially in the handle zones, beyond 3,000 meters, maybe we don't know many things. So these technologies in the BBNJ agreement, what role will play?
So I think with BBNJ and any effort towards marine conservation, the biggest issue we have is the lack of baselines. So we're trying to look at conserving species, but as you say, we don't necessarily know how many species there are. Yeah. There are many species that haven't yet been described or even discovered. To be able to identify species, we really need reference databases, whether it's reference libraries for DNA sequences or image libraries, or even libraries of sounds that are made by marine animals, which we're now moving more and more towards being able to identify species from the sound that they make, from their vocalizations, for example. But again, we need these underlying libraries of those characteristics against which we can compare a measurement to be able to say, these are the species that we found in this area. So really, to be able to make any progress with BBNJ or the Convention on Biological Diversity framework, we urgently need to establish those baselines against which we can measure progress. The other big issue with unmanned technologies in the high seas, and Maria mentioned having a remote pilot somewhere, but sometimes there isn't even that. They're floating drifters that can move in and out of EEZs into the high seas, and there's a really big challenge with the data that we're collecting from those floats, and issues around security, and then also compliance with these international treaties with regard to what we do with the data. And then just a final point on the accessibility and equitability. In POGO, we do work a lot on capacity development, providing training programs, and developing low-cost solutions for ocean observations to be able to have have more observations being made in the global south in particular. Yes. We place a lot of importance on those things as well to be able to have a really global and inclusive observation system.
Exactly. Marianna, any thoughts about the oceans and especially how these technologies will remain accessible to all nations and will reduce the gap in the global north and global south?
Europe is going to bring forward a very ambitious agenda, the Ocean Pact. And so we see that the blue economy is part of the discussion. It's more and more relevant in the discussions. This is why it was discussed also in the European Council. And during the latest conclusions of the European Council, it was mentioned that they welcome and they want an accelerated ratification of this agreement in order to promote the protection of the oceans. Yes. And the governance at international level. So we will see also we're following all these procedures.
And now I come to the most important point, which I need solutions. What are the solutions and all this different expertise you have to enable the mass utilization of these ocean observation technologies? From what I see, they can be used in shipping. For example, we already use remote operate vehicles to inspect the vessels. They can be used to tackle the triplanetary crisis. And also, as you mentioned, they can also be used for defense. So, Maria, please tell us how we can mass utilize these technologies.
Flexibility. We need to start, we would need to continue thinking out of the box. We must understand that each one of those technologies, each one of those drafters that you see there can actually have multiple uses. And that really means that under specific circumstances, they would fall under a different regulatory regime. And we must realize that we're not operating in silos. We're not operating in a situation where you have 1, 2, 3 things separate from each other. You might actually have the same kind of instrument being used for different purposes, and perhaps different purposes at the same time. And you need to adjust to this reality.
Chameleon approach. We have to, flexibility is the most important.
The natural approach.
I keep this.
I mean, it's not a choice, it's a necessity.
Sophie, solutions.
Solutions. So I think that many of the techniques and methods that I've mentioned, such as environmental DNA and passive acoustic monitoring, are hugely scalable solutions that can be added to these unmanned autonomous platforms to create this really global network of interconnected sensing devices that will be transmitting data back to shore and having those data combined into products that support decision-making. But I think these platforms and solutions also need to be combined with manned solutions, and particularly in coastal areas which are not easily accessible by means of technology, particularly sort of remote areas. And a solution to that is using citizen science. And this is also kind of towards the ocean literacy point I made earlier. Getting people involved in the collection of data is a great way to make them understand or to help them understand the utility of the data and the importance of the ocean more generally. So in POGA, we also support a number of citizen science projects. One has been looking at the monitoring of marine litter on beaches in West Africa. Environmental DNA is also a great way to get people involved, citizens, local communities, because they can just collect a sample of water and filter it, and then the sample gets sent back to a lab somewhere, and a couple of weeks later they can get the data back and see a long list of all the species that have been found in their local water just from the water that they've collected.
Okay, I will take a solution from the European Investment Bank now.
Thank you. I think that we need to scale up first of
Scale
all.
up, very important.
We need to bring all these technologies close to the industry. If we don't test them in a real environment, in the infrastructure, industry can host all these new technologies, can test them, can see the purposes, if they serve the purposes that they promise, can identify other ways of using them. So I think that bringing them closer to the industry and creating an ecosystem supported by excellent academia research centers, I think that this is the way to scale up and identify how they can best be used. So to create, to make a wider use of these technologies.
Yeah, thank you. I hope that all these technologies will be mass utilized for the benefit of our oceans. It's time to know more about the ocean floor than we know already about the Mars and the Moon. We have identified till now 250,000 marine species. The number is 10 times higher. So we need to know, we need to learn what is there down in the hadal zones and in depths up to 11,000 meters. And the fifth industrial revolution is approaching very fast. And the fifth industrial revolution is not just about robot thinking, it's about humanity rethinking. Thank you all for attending.
Thank you.